Well, some new details released explaining the Amanda Knox guilty verdict. A 337-page Italian court report says Knox slashed her roommate's throat with a knife and that she had help from two assailants who restrained and also stabbed the victim. The report was written to support the judge's January conviction of Knox and her boyfriend. Defense lawyers now have 90 days to appeal to Italy's high court. But as we're taking our first look at this report, we want to talk about it with some experts. Heather Hansen is a trial attorney, Dan Schorr is a former federal prosecutor, and Dr. Michael Bodden is a forensic pathologist and a Fox News contributor. Dr. Bodden, let's go to you first, because there are some interesting references to some new forensics in this case. What strikes you most?
Well, the indication is that there are some finger marks on the body of the decedent, that there's evidence that two people were holding her at the time of the stabbing and cutting of her through her neck. And that there were more than two or more knives used to indicate that they're interpreting as two or more people involved in the stabbing. So that's persuasive in the Italian court.
Is it persuasive to you, Dr. Bodden?
Persuasive. Well, that in itself isn't persuasive. That's that there are necessarily more than one person. But one of the interesting things was that the motive presented is not a sexual assault, a game gone awry, but that it was because the decedent accused Amanda Knox of stealing money from her.
And that's what I want to talk about with our attorneys. We'll be back to Dr. Bodden in just a moment. Dan, what do you think about that? That's some new information, that apparently they were having some sort of argument about money the night of the murder.
It's very disturbing because in addition to having different verdicts, first a conviction, then an acquittal, then a conviction, you have different theories of the case. First, it was a sex game that led to this conflict. Now they're saying there was this history of fighting and that escalated. You also, as we just talked about, there's different rulings about the DNA evidence. First, that was found persuasive. Then the appeals court said it wasn't. Now this court is saying, no, it is something that should be relied upon for a guilty verdict. So there's a lot of reasons to be disturbed here.
One of the things that we don't have, though, Heather, in this introduction, I should say, of this two-knife theory is that we don't have the other knife that the judge says is key to this case. How does that impact the case?
It impacts the case, and I think it impacts whether or not she's going to be extradited, Jenna. You know, we get into this whole idea of double jeopardy and whether it applies because of the Italian system. But if you're, as Dan said, introducing new evidence, new knives, new DNA evidence, you're making it into a new trial.
Let's ask Dr. Bodden about that. Dr. Bodden, the DNA evidence has been controversial in this case. And in the case of the knife that they do have, apparently the DNA that is tied to Meredith Kircher is too small to even really test. So based on the forensics that are available to us right now, how reliable are they?
Well, there were some problems with the DNA examinations as reported in Italy, but the presence of DNA can develop a relationship. But the absence of DNA doesn't mean that she wasn't present at the scene. And that's one of the issues. But the problem is, in part, that the Italian judicial system handles homicides in a different way, murder trials, than the U.S., has been noted. And the people in Italy feel she's guilty. The people in this country feel she's not guilty. And that's going to be very interesting as far as our extradition treaty goes with Italy.
Heather, you're nodding your head. And is it because of the double jeopardy?
Well, it's just so interesting, Jenna, because the people in Italy and in a lot of Europe really believe that she's guilty and feel as though she really needs to be brought back. And I don't see the Italian officials not pursuing that. At the same time, here in America, she has public opinion strongly behind her. And they will really fight against the State Department agreeing to extradite her. So it's going to be a real political issue as well as legal.
There's still a question about evidence, though, because again, in this report, Dan, what's so damning about it is the judge says that Amanda Knox is the one that delivered the fatal blow. Yet the evidence for that, one wonders where it is, or where it's been at least for the last several years.
Right, this judge comes to conclusions, and it's hard to see what evidence that's based on, and it's also different than two prior courts, and it's also different than the prosecution theory has been, so it's very disturbing. Extradition is going to be very difficult, an issue to resolve. There's the political question of whether the State Department asks for it. There's the legal question of whether the Justice Department can successfully extradite her if they try.
And if there's new evidence, Heather, though, does that give credence to the possibility that she is extradited?
I think it makes it less likely, Jenna, because it makes it, first of all, you've talked about it, it's unfair. And one of the reasons we can, and to put it very simply, we can deny extradition is if it was an unfair process. It also makes it more likely to argue double jeopardy because it's a new trial when you're introducing new evidence. So I think it argues against it.
Very interesting, though. This has still not gone away, and the answers in this case are still not there. Heather, Dan, great to see you. Dr. Bonin, great to have your expertise as well.